Della Marsh had cooked for the rocking tea 15 years. 15 winters. And on the day they broke her, she was still holding a tin plate. She stood in the yard with the supper plate in her hand, and the foreman told her she'd draw no wages. No reference. Nothing. A cook who counts too close, he said, loud enough for the bunkhouse to hear, is a cook who's been stealing. She did not argue. She did not cry. Then Silas Thorpe himself stepped into the firelight, 9 hands behind him, 2 neighbor ranchers beside him. He pointed at a woman who had fed him through a blizzard, and he called her the rustlers' inside help. 42 heads short off my spring tally, he said, and the woman with the tally book wants us to believe it wasn't her hand feeding the thieves. 20-odd men heard it. Not one spoke for her. She asked only one thing, that the missing calves be penned. Held for the Roundup, not sold off quiet. Thorpe laughed. He thought it damned her. He granted it. He didn't ask why. Her Tom had red iron for the territory 9 years, and she'd stood at his elbow the whole while. But that's later. If you believe the quiet ones always read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this ride travels. Now, Halloran, Montana Territory. The spring of 1883. Let me take you back to before the fire. Before the plate. Back to when Della Marsh was just the woman who fed them. The rocking tea sat in a fold of grass under the bear paw shoulder, and the cookhouse was the warmest room on it. That was Della's doing. She kept the stove banked at all hours. She kept coffee going from 4 in the morning till the last hand crawled in from a night ride. 15 years she'd done it, and in 15 years, no man had gone to his bedroll hungry, and no man had gone to it wondering if the cook had cheated him of an ounce. She was 54 that spring, wide through the shoulders, gray coming in at the temples, though her hair was still mostly a dark brown she wore pinned back off her face. Her hands were work-hardened and steady. She wore an apron with a shine of old grease on it that no washing would take out, and she wore it like other women wore their good dress. It meant something. It meant she had a place. She was a widow. Tom Marsh had been dead 6 years. He'd been a territory brand inspector, and a good one, and the fever took him in a season that took a lot of good men. Della had come to the rocking tea a wife and stayed on a widow because the work was honest and the roof didn't leak, and a woman alone in that country took the sure thing over the pretty one. Thorpe had kept her on. She'd thought that was kindness. She'd learned different. Here's a thing about Della Marsh. She noticed. It was not a thing she tried to do. It was a thing she was. Standing at Tom's elbow for 9 years, she'd learned to look at an animal the way he looked at it, and even after he was gone, the looking never stopped. She saw when a cow was off her feed a day before the hands did. She saw when a boy was homesick under his bravado. She saw the count. That was the trouble. In the end. She saw the count. The winter of '82 had been a killer. 3 blizzards stacked one on the other, and a fever that ran the bunkhouse for a month. Della had cooked through all of it. When the fever came, she doctored it too, because there was no one else. She'd sat up with a 19-year-old named Toby Farrell for 2 nights running when the boy's chest filled and rattled, and she'd broken the heat in him with mustard plasters and cool cloths and plain stubbornness. She'd doctored Thorpe's own hands, 3 of them, down at once, and she'd walked between the bunks with broth and quinine and not slept herself for the better part of a week. When it passed, the rocking tea had lost no man. That was the cook's doing, and everybody knew it, and nobody would say it out loud on the day it mattered. She kept the cook's tally the way Tom had taught her to keep anything. Honest to the pound. Every side of beef that came to her kitchen, she weighed. Every quarter, every barrel of flour, every sack of beans. She wrote it in a book, not because anyone made her, because a number you didn't write down was a number you'd argue about later, and Della did not care to argue. The book settled things before they started. There was an evening early that spring, before any of the trouble, when Toby Farrell sat at the end of her table nursing a coffee and watching her run a column of figures. He was mended by then, and he'd taken to hanging about the cookhouse like a stray she'd fed once too often. "You count like a bank man," he said. She didn't look up. My Tom inspected brands for the territory. 9 years. A body picks things up, standing at a man's elbow that long. That was all. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. She turned the page and went on with her figures, and Toby went on with his coffee, and neither of them thought a thing of it. She didn't underline it. She didn't know yet that it was the most important sentence she'd say all year. She just knew how to read iron. She'd known it so long, she'd forgotten it was a thing worth knowing. The trouble started small. It always does. It started in her book, which was where all true things at the Rocking Tea started, whether the men liked it or not. The beef came up short. Not much. A cook orders against a herd, and a working outfit slaughters its own. And the numbers ought to square between what the range gave and what her kitchen used. That spring, they didn't square. She butchered against the tally, and the tally against the range count, and somewhere in the middle there was a gap. A few head. Then a few more. She did what a careful woman does first. She assumed it was her own hand. She checked her figures. She checked them again, back 3 weeks, sitting at the deal table by lamplight with the stove ticking as it cooled. The figures held. The gap was not in her arithmetic. It was in the herd. So she wrote the true number. Dated it. She did not raise it with anyone, because a gap of a few head in a country full of wolves and hard weather and honest strays was not yet a thing worth a woman's name. Calves wandered. Cows died in coulees and were never found. She wrote it down, and she watched. And that was the whole of it. The first warning she made to herself. In ink. Dated. To no one. But the gap didn't close. It widened. By the time the grass was up and the cows had dropped their spring calves, the thing had grown past weather and wolves. Della kept a rough count in her head of what the range ought to hold, because you cannot cook for an outfit 15 years and not carry its herd in your bones. She'd watch the cows come down to the creek at evening, and she'd count calves against mothers the way another woman might count stitches. The calves didn't match. There were cows dry that had been heavy a month back. There were cows bawling for calves that weren't at their flanks and weren't anywhere. That was not weather. Cows do not lose that many calves to coulees in a good grass year. That was a hand. Somebody's hand. She told the foreman that was the right thing to do, and Della did the right thing the way she did everything, plainly and without drama. Rafe Doggett was 38 that year and built like a fence post, all hard lines and no give. He was Thorpe's man to the bone. He wore a glove on his right hand more often than not, and Della had never thought much about it, because a lot of men who worked iron and rope wore a glove on the rope hand. She caught him at the corral one morning, and she said her piece straight. "The spring calves don't match the cows that dropped them, Rafe. I've watched them come to water a week now. We're short, and it's not wolves." He looked at her the way a man looks at a dog that's learned a trick he doesn't like. "You keeping cattle count now, on top of the beans?" "I keep my eyes open. Same as you." "You cook," he said. "Amos Kell counts cattle. Come Roundup. Not you." He pulled his glove tighter on that right hand, a small thing, a nothing thing, and she'd remember it later. "Stick to your kitchen, Della. You count too close. Folks start to wonder why." There it was. She didn't hear the threat in it then. She would. She went back to her kitchen. But she wrote that down too. The date, and the words, the warning made, and to whom, and what he answered. She didn't know she was building a case. She was just doing what Tom had taught her. Write the number. Write the day. A thing on paper doesn't argue. The talk in the bunkhouse turned that spring, the way talk does, to money. Thorpe's money. There was a note at the bank in Halloran, and men who share a bunkhouse share everything, including what they overhear when the boss talks too loud in the yard. $3,000, due the day after the roundup. And riding on it, they said, was a railroad beef contract. A fat one, a make-or-break one, and the contract paid on head. On count. Della heard it and set it aside and didn't let herself think what it meant. She was not a suspicious woman by nature. She was a careful one, which is a different thing. But a careful woman files a fact even when she won't yet look at it. And she filed that one. A man $3,000 in debt, with a contract that paid by the head, and a herd that was somehow coming up short in the cook's book and long in the boss's mouth. She should have run then. She'd think that later, too, she should have taken her book and her name and gone. But Della Marsh had a blind spot as wide as the Montana sky, and it was this. She believed that being useful and being honest was protection enough. She believed a woman who had never once lied or stolen could not be made into a liar or a thief by anyone. Because the truth was the truth, and it would out. 15 years the rocking tea had proved her right. She had no reason yet to know that the truth does not out on its own. Somebody has to carry it into the light. And somebody powerful can bury it deeper than the light ever reaches. So, she went to Thorpe. This was the third time she raised it, and she raised it to the top, because Rafe had shrugged her off and the gap had only grown. She took her tally book across the yard to the main house one evening after supper, and she found Silas Thorpe on his porch, with a cigar and the last light on the hills, and she laid it out for him plain. She opened the book to the page. She put her blunt finger on the figures. 42 head, Mr. Thorpe. That's what's walked off the paper since the grass came up. 42 calves I can account for by their mothers and can't account for on the ground. That's not weather, and it's not wolves. Somebody's working your herd. Thorpe was 51, silver at the jaw, and he had a way of smiling that never got up as far as his eyes. He looked at the book a long moment. He looked at her. 42 head, he said. To the calf. You're sure of that number? I wrote it as I found it. Dated each week. It's all there. And Silas Thorpe reached out and took the book from her hands. Gentle. Almost tender. He closed it around her figures and he tucked it under his arm like a man tucking away a thing he'd been looking for. I'll keep this safe, he said. Evidence like this. You did right to bring it to me, Della. You did just exactly right. And the floor tilted under her. She couldn't have said how she knew. It was the same knowing that told her a cow was sick a day early. It was in the smile that stopped at the eyes, and in the word evidence, and in the easy way his hand closed over 15 years of her honest figures and made them his. She had walked her proof across the yard and handed it to the one man it proved something about, and he had thanked her, and now it was gone. I'll want that back, she said. It's my kitchen book. I keep my orders in it. Course you will, Thorpe said, and drew on his cigar, and did not give it back. After Roundup. Everything settles at Roundup. She walked back across the yard in the dark, and her legs did not feel like her own. She had done everything right. She had noticed, and checked, and corrected, and warned, and carried it up the line to the highest man on the place. She had followed honesty like a road, certain it led somewhere safe, and she stood now in the cookhouse doorway understanding, for the first time in her careful life, that she had followed it straight into a country with no law in it, but the one Silas Thorpe made up as he went. She did not sleep that night. But she did not cry, either. She lay in her narrow room off the kitchen, and she thought about her book in Thorpe's hands, and about 42 calves, and about a note at the bank that came due on account. And somewhere under her fear a colder, older thing began to stir. Tom's thing. The looking. The part of her that read. Roundup came the way weather comes, all at once after a long, low sky. The rocking tea threw a fire the evening before, the way outfits did, because Roundup was work, but the eve of it was near a holiday. The neighbor outfits sent men. Marion Vance sent her boy Eli, 17 and serious, down from the little V-bar to ride the gather. 2 ranchers Della knew by face and hat came in and hunkered by the fire with their coffee. The hands were loud and easy. Somebody had a mouth organ. The night smelled of wood smoke and coffee and horse, and Della moved through it the way she'd moved through 15 such nights, feeding men, her tin plates going out full and coming back clean. She had a plate in her hand when it happened. That's the picture I want you to hold. A woman who had fed these men through blizzards, standing at her own cook fire with a supper plate in her hand. Silas Thorpe walked into the firelight, and he had her book. He held it up so they could see it. Her kitchen book, with her figures in it, dated in her own hand. And he opened it to the page she'd shown him, and he read her 42 head out loud to the ring of firelit faces, and then he turned it inside out in front of all of them. 42 head short off my spring tally, he said, and his voice carried over the mouth organ and the low talk till the whole fire went quiet. 42. And here's the woman who kept the count. Kept it close. Kept it careful. Wrote down every one that walked off. He let that sit. Now I ask you, men, who's better placed to feed a rustler than the one who knows to the head what's out there and when it goes missing? Who counts a herd that close in a book nobody asked her to keep, unless she's keeping it for somebody? Rafe Doggett stood at Thorpe's shoulder with his gloved hand easy on his belt, and he nodded like a man hearing scripture. The woman with the tally book, Thorpe said, wants us to believe it wasn't her hand feeding the thieves. 20 odd men. 9 of the Rocking T's own, and Eli Vance, and the 2 neighbor ranchers, and hands from 3 outfits. They looked at Della Marsh over the fire, and she watched the looking change. She watched 15 years of broth and mustard plasters and honest weight go thin and uncertain in their faces. Toby Farrell, whose chest she'd unlocked with her own 2 hands one killing Winter, stared at the ground and would not lift his eyes, and that was the worst of all of it, worse than Thorpe, worse than Rafe. That was the shape of what a powerful man's word could do. It could reach into a boy who owed you his life and fill him with doubt. The foreman said the wage part. Rafe Doggett, with something close to pleasure. You'll draw no wages off this outfit, he said. No reference, neither. A cook who counts too close is a cook who's been stealing. You've got till the roundup's done to clear off Rocking T grass. Della Marsh stood in the firelight with the tin plate in her hand, and every eye on the place was on her, and she did not argue. She did not cry. She had learned that much from a hard country and a harder year. Tears would be meat to them. Argument would be sport. She gave them neither. She set the plate down. Quiet. On the plank table, by the fire, where a dozen clean tin plates were already stacked, and she set hers with them so gently it made no sound. Then she spoke, and her voice was so level it stopped the fire's crackle from feeling loud. I'll ask one thing. Mr. Thorpe, 1, those short calves. The 42. When you gather them, pen them. Hold them for the count. Don't sell a one of them quiet before Amos Kell has looked at every head. She let her steady eyes go around the ring, unhurried, and come back to Thorpe. That's all. Hold them for the roundup. Silas Thorpe laughed. He threw his head back and laughed, and the men laughed with him because the boss had laughed, and it was safer to laugh, and the sound of it went up into the dark with the smoke. He thought she'd hanged herself. He thought a guilty woman asking that the evidence of her guilt be lined up and looked at was a woman gone simple with fear. He couldn't imagine another reason. His whole life had never given him one. Pen them, he said, wiping his eye. Hold them for the count. You hear that, boys? She wants us to hold them. Well, I'll grant you that, Della. God's truth, I will. We'll pen every short calf and hold them till Amos Kell's counted every hair. And when he does, the laugh went out of his voice and something meaner came in, you'll wish we'd sold them and let it lie. He did not ask her why she wanted it. Not once. That was his blind spot, and it was as wide as hers, and hers would cost her a name for a night, while his would cost him everything he had. He was a man who could not picture a woman knowing a thing he didn't. He could not picture the hide of a calf testifying in a language he'd never bothered to learn. So he granted her the one thing that would end him, and he did it laughing, to hurt her. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Thorpe," plain as that. And she turned and walked out of the firelight toward the dark cookhouse, and behind her the mouth organ started up again, uncertain, and the fire went back to its business. They gave her till Roundup's end, stripped of wages, stripped of a reference, stripped in front of every outfit in the district of a name she'd spent 15 years earning honest. A woman alone, 54, told to walk off into a country that did not keep women who couldn't work. Any sensible person would have gone. Packed a war bag and caught the first freight south from Halloran and started over somewhere the story hadn't reached. Cleared her name never, but kept her skin, and let Silas Thorpe have his lie and his contract and his $3,000. That was the sensible thing. Della Marsh went to the holding pen instead. She went that same night, late, when the fire had burned to coals and the outfit had drunk itself to sleep, and the only sound was the shift and blow of penned cattle. They'd gathered the near bunch already, the short calves and their claimed mothers, and thrown them in the big corral by the branding chute to hold for the count. Della took a lantern, and she went down to the rails in the dark, not to grieve, not to say goodbye to a place that had thrown her away. She went because the older, colder thing under her fear had been stirring for weeks, and now it woke all the way, and it had a job to do. She hung the lantern on a post, and she looked at cattle. Really looked, the way Tom had taught her. The way she had not let herself look, all spring. Because looking that way at your own outfit's herd is a kind of accusation, and Della hadn't wanted to accuse. There was a calf near the rails. A little snubbed thing, cropped short in one ear, bawling for a mother that answered from somewhere back in the press. It carried the Rocking T on its flank, the Rocking T brand she'd seen 10,000 times, burned clean into the hide. Except it wasn't clean. She held the lantern close, and her heart went slow and hard in her chest, one beat at a time, because Tom's training was up and running now behind her eyes, and it saw what a rancher's eye slid right over. The brand sat wrong. There was the Rocking T, sure enough. But under it, through it, was another shape. Older, flatter, healed pale. And the fresh iron that had made the Rocking T sat over that old shape raised and dark and angry, the way a scar sits when it's new, proud of the hide, still swollen with the burn. Two brands. One on top of the other, and the bottom one, the old flat-heeled one that the running iron had tried to swallow, it was a V. A V with a bar under it. The V-bar. Marion Vance's brand, the little outfit up the creek that couldn't afford to lose a calf and was losing them by the dozen. Della Marsh stood at the rails in the lantern light, with her breath gone out of her, and she read the hide the way her husband had read 1,000 hides in 9 years for the territory. A running iron, a straight rod heated red, used freehand like a pen, had taken Marion Vance's V-bar and dragged it, curve by curve, into Silas Thorpe's Rocking T. The old brand lay flat and pale because it was old and healed. The new work rode over it raised and dark because it was fresh, weeks fresh, and a fresh burn heals proud and swollen before it settles. Any brand inspector alive could wet the hair and read it in a minute. Tom had taught her the whole grammar of it at his elbow, curve and scar and heel, and she had it still, entire. The calves weren't short off Thorpe's tally. They were stolen onto it. Rafe's running iron had been turning Marion Vance's calves into Rocking T stock all spring, fattening Thorpe's count for a contract that paid by the head and a note that came due on it. And when the cook's honest book started catching the gap, they hadn't stopped stealing. They'd just decided to hang the theft on the one honest person who'd noticed it. She'd handed Thorpe her book so he could turn it against her. She'd asked him to pen the calves so he could laugh. And all the while the proof of everything was standing right here, bawling in a corral, burned into a living hide in a language only she, of everyone on the rocking tee, could read out loud. The iron never lies. Tom used to say that. She could hear him saying it, at the rails of some pen years gone, wetting the hair on a disputed steer with his thumb. The iron never lies. It only tells on the hand that held it. She stood there a long while. The lantern hissed. The snubbed calf bawled and was answered. And Della Marsh, who had followed honesty like a road straight into a trap, stood at the holding pen and understood that the road had one more turn in it that Silas Thorpe had never once imagined. She could run and save her skin and clear her name never. Or she could stay. She could stay through the roundup she'd been thrown off of. She could keep her mouth shut and her calm and let Thorpe believe he'd won. And on hearing day, when the district inspector came to count the disputed hides, not Thorpe, not Rafe, but Amos Kell, whose word was law over a brand and always would be. No matter how big a man's note or how loud his laugh, she could walk to this calf in front of every cattleman in the district and lay her hand on its flank and read the running iron aloud. No paper, no book. Thorpe had her book. Nothing but the living animal and 40 years of standing at the right man's elbow. She'd have to trust the hide to testify. She'd have to trust that the truth, carried into the light by the one hand steady enough to carry it, would out after all. She reached through the rails and laid her palm flat on the snubbed calf's flank, over the raised proud scar of the fresh iron, and she felt the warmth of the living hide under her hand, and the little animal quieted at her touch. "You just stand still for me," she told it. "Lo, you just wait for the count. You'll say it better than I ever could." Then she took her lantern down off the post, and she turned to go back up to the cookhouse to think out how a woman with nothing but her eyes and her nerve steals a herd of proof back from a man who owned the law on his own land. And out in the dark, past the far corner of the pen, boot leather scraped on hardpack. Somebody was standing where the lantern light didn't reach. Somebody who'd been there long enough to watch a fired cook walk a light down to a pen full of calves she'd been accused of stealing, and stand at the rails and put her hand on the one snubbed animal in the whole bunch. Della went still. The lantern swung a little in her hand and threw its light out toward the sound, and caught the shine of an eye and the shape of a shoulder, and a gloved right hand resting easy on a corral rail. Rafe Doggett didn't say a word. He just watched her and smiled. Della did not run. Running was what a guilty woman did, and she had spent 54 years learning that the ground you stand on is the only thing a body truly owns. So she stood. "Evening, Rafe," she said. Her voice came out level. It surprised her, how level. He came off the rail slow. The gloved hand stayed easy at his side. He walked into the lantern light the way a cat walks up on a bird it already knows it has, in no hurry at all. "You're a long way from your kitchen," he said. "So are you." He smiled again. Up close the smile did not reach his eyes. It never had. She had served this man beans and biscuits for 6 years, and had never once seen his eyes go soft, not at Christmas, not at the burying of 2 hands the winter the fever came through. "Man likes to check his stock before the count," he said. "What's your excuse? I like to say goodbye to a place before I leave it." He looked at the calf. The snubbed one. The one with the cropped ear, standing quiet where her hand had gentled it. "Funny place to say it," Rafe said. "Right there at that calf." Della held the lantern steady. She would not let it shake. If it shook he would know, and if he knew, the calf would be gone by morning and her one chance gone with it. "They all look the same to me in the dark," she said. "I was just resting my hand." Old woman's feet. For a long moment he said nothing. The night crowded in around the little pool of light. Somewhere off in the pen a calf bawled and another answered it. The creek talked to itself down past the willows. Then Rafe laughed. Once, low. Old woman's feet, he said. Sure, he did not believe her. She could see that he did not believe her. But she could also see that he could not think of what a fired cook meant to do with a penned calf, a woman with no book and no wages and no man to speak for her. He filed it away behind those flat eyes to worry at later. And later, she prayed, would be too late. Go on up to bed, Della, he said. You've got a road to walk in the morning. I've got till after the count. Mr. Thorpe said. Mr. Thorpe says a lot of things. He turned his gloved hand over and looked at the back of it, at the leather, as if there were something written there only he could read. You want my advice, you take the road early. Roundups get loud. Things happen in the noise. I've cooked 11 of them, she said. I know how loud they get. She took her lantern and she walked past him, close enough to smell the horse and the smoke and the sour edge of a man who did not sleep easy. She kept her back straight all the way up the slope to the cookhouse. She did not look around. She knew he watched her the whole way, and she gave him nothing to watch but a tired old woman going home to bed. Inside, she set the lantern on the plank table, and she sat down, and she let her hands shake then, alone, where no one could see. Then she got up and she banked the stove for morning, because there were 20 men to feed at first light, whether they thought her a thief or not, and a woman who quit feeding people was a woman who had already lost. The next 3 days she cooked. She cooked like the world had not tilted under her. She rose in the black before dawn, and she got the fire up and the coffee on. And when the hands came stumbling and rubbing sleep out of their faces, she fed them. Some of them would not meet her eye. Toby Farrell would. The boy carried his tin plate to the far end of the table and ate fast and kept his head down, but every so often she caught him looking at her, and there was something working behind his young face, something he wanted to say, and did not have the courage for yet. She served Silas Thorpe his coffee each of those mornings with her own hands. That was the hardest thing. Harder than the pen in the dark, harder than Rafe's flat smile. She would carry the tin cup out to the main house porch where Thorpe took his coffee in the cool of the morning, and she would set it down at his elbow. And she would say, "Morning, Mr. Thorpe," in the same voice she had used for 6 years. And he would look up at her, this man who had stood before 20 riders, and named her a thief to save his own hide, and he would say, "Morning, Della," easy as anything, like nothing had passed between them at all. She understood him better than he understood himself. He had told the lie so well that some part of him had come to half believe it. That was how men like Thorpe lived with themselves. They rewrote the ledger in their own heads until the numbers came out clean. Let him. Let him drink his coffee and count his stolen calves and feel the note weighing sweet in his pocket. She served him, and she smiled her tired old smile, and she said not one word about hides. Her Tom used to say the thing about a trap was, you never let the animal see the spring. You set it in the dark, and you covered it over, and you walked away whistling. The animal did the rest. It walked in on its own feet, following its own nature. Thorpe's nature was greed. Rafe's was cruelty. She had only to keep still and let them walk. At night, twice more, she went down to the pen. She was more careful now. She left the lantern up at the cookhouse and she went by moonlight, and she did not touch the calf, only looked, only counted the rails to it in the dark so she could find it blind. Snubbed 1, third pen, 4 rails down from the gatepost. She learned it the way she learned a recipe, by heart, by hand, so that when the day came she could walk to it in front of 100 men and never once look lost. She studied the others too. There were more than the one. In the moonlight she found a second calf with the tell, the flat old scar lying quiet under the raised dark new one, the V dragged and stretched and closed into the top loop of a rocking T. Then, a third. Her Tom's voice came up out of the years, patient, at her elbow the way he'd been in life. See how the fresh burn heals proud, Dell, stands up off the hide. Old brand lies flat, gone to leather. Man runs an iron over another man's mark. He can fool the eye at 10 feet. He can't fool the hair, and he can't fool the scar. Wet it down, and the truth stands right up. The truth stands right up. She held to that like a rail in the dark. On the fourth day, the outfits began to ride in. They came from up and down the creek, the neighboring ranches, small men with 100 head and big men with 1,000, come for the spring roundup the way they came every year, to sort the mixed cattle off the open range and claim their own by the brand. They came with their sons and their hired hands and their strings of horses, and they made their camps out along the flat below the rocking tea buildings, and the smoke of a dozen fires stood up in the evening air. Among them came Marion Vance. Della watched her ride in. An old woman, near Della's own age, straight in the saddle for all her years, in a man's coat gone gray at the seams. Beside her rode the boy, Eli, 17 and gangling, on a horse too big for him, trying to sit like his mother. The V-Bar, the little outfit up the creek that could not afford to lose 42 calves and live. Della's calves. Vance's calves. The same calves. She did not go to them. Not yet. A word too soon would ruin everything. But she watched the boy get down and stretch and look around him at the big rocking tea spread with the wide eyes of a young thing, seeing how much some men had and how little his own people did, and something in her chest pulled tight. That was who the stealing fell on. Not on Thorpe, who had everything. On the widow in the gray coat, and the boy on the too big horse. The next morning Amos Kell arrived, and everything changed. He came early. That was the thing none of them had counted on. The district brand inspector, the Roundup captain, the one man whose word was law over a disputed hide, he was supposed to come the day of the count, and instead he rode in a full day ahead on a mud-flecked gray, a spare. Gray-mustached man with a tally book of his own under his arm and an eye that missed nothing. Della saw Rafe's face when Kell rode in, just for a second before the foreman smoothed it over. But she saw it. The quick tightening around the eyes, the gloved hand going still on the rail. They had meant to move the calf. She understood it all at once, standing at her stove with a spoon in her hand. They had meant to cull the snubbed calf and the others quiet, before the count, sell them off down the trail or shoot them and drag them into a coulee and let the tally come out clean with the evidence gone to the buzzards. Kell coming a day early had caught them flat. There was no time now to move a calf without 100 watching men to see it done. But Thorpe was not a man to give up a plan. That afternoon she heard him at the corral, low, urgent, talking to Rafe, and she heard the tail end of it as she carried a bucket past. "That snubbed one and the others you know of," Thorpe was saying. "Cut them out tonight. I don't care how. I want them gone before Kell puts a hand on them." "Kell's got men on the pens already," Rafe said. "Amos don't sleep. Then do it careful. But do it." Thorpe's voice had a crack in it she had never heard before, a hairline of fear. "That note falls due the day after the count, Rafe. You understand me? Everything rides on the head count. Everything. I will not lose it over a bawling calf." Della carried her bucket on past and did not slow. Her heart was going like a hammer. Tonight, they meant to take the calf tonight. She had to move first. She found Toby Farrell forking hay in the near barn, alone, and she stepped into the shadow of the door, where the yard could not see her. Toby, he jumped like she'd fired a gun. "Miss Della, you oughtn't. Folks see you talking to me. Folks can hang," she said. "Listen to me, boy. You saw something. Weeks back. At the fire. Out past the pens. You saw Rafe dog it with an iron. The boy went white. The fork hung in his hands. I never. You did." She stepped closer. She kept her voice down, but she put 15 years of feeding this outfit into it, 15 years of doctoring their hurts and burying their dead. "You saw him at a little fire with a running iron gone wet at the tip, and you didn't know what it meant, and you were scared, so you never said. I'm not asking you to be brave, Toby. I'm asking you what you saw. Just that." For a long moment the boy said nothing. His throat worked. Out in the yard a horse stamped, and a man laughed. And then the whole thing came out of him in a rush, low and shaking. "It was maybe 3 weeks back. I couldn't sleep. I went out to walk it off, and there was a fire down past the third pen, just a little one. And I thought it was queer, 'cause nobody camps down there. And it was Rafe. He had an iron in the coals, and he had a calf snubbed to the post, bawling, and he had it on the calf's side. And when he seen me, he stood up, and he said if I ever breathed a word, he'd see me run off every outfit from here to Texas with a rustler's name on me. And the boy's voice broke. I never said nothing, Miss Della. I was afraid for my wages. I'm sorry. I'm awful sorry. You've got nothing to be sorry for yet, she said gently. But you've got a chance to, right now, to make it square. They mean to cut that snubbed calf out of the string tonight and lose it before the count. I need it to stay. I need it standing in that pen when Amos Kell walks the tally in the morning. Can you keep it there, Toby? Can you do that one thing? The boy straightened up. Something came into his young face that had not been there before, some first hard set of a man's jaw. Rafe don't scare me more than doing wrong does, he said. Not anymore. I'll keep it there. I'll drive it back in the middle of the whole bunch where he can't get at it without a dozen men to see. And I'll sleep at that pen tonight myself. Good boy, she said, and she found her own eyes stinging, and she blinked it back, because there was no time. Your daddy'd be proud. My daddy's dead. I know it. That's how I know he'd be proud. That night, Rafe Doggett went down to the pens in the dark, and he found Toby Farrell sitting up on the top rail with a rifle across his knees, and 3 other young hands rolled in their blankets at the gate, and 100 sleeping cattlemen camped on the flat not 60 yards off. And there was nothing on God's earth he could do about a calf in the middle of that bunch without waking the whole district to watch him do it. Della heard about it after, how the foreman had stood in the dark a while, and then turned and walked back up to the house with his gloved hands empty. The trap was set. The animal had walked in. Now there was nothing to do but wait for morning and pull the spring. That morning, she did not cook. She rose in the dark as always, and she got the fire up and the coffee on, and she fed them their last breakfast. All of them, the rocking tea hands and half the neighbor outfits besides, because that was who she was, and she would go out being who she was. And when the sun came up over the eastern rim and the horn blew for the count, she took off her apron, and she folded it, and she laid it on the plank table, and she walked down to the holding pens with the rest. The Cattlemen's Association had gathered. 30 riders and more ringed around the sorting pens in the clean morning light, the small men and the big, come to see their brands read and their stock claimed. Amos Kell stood at the gate of the disputed pen with his tally book, calling calves one at a time as the riders cut them out, reading the brand aloud, marking the sheet. It was the oldest law of the range, older than any sheriff. The brand, and the man who could read it, and the count. Silas Thorpe stood near the front in a clean coat, his thumbs in his vest, smiling and easy, a big man on his own ground among his neighbors. Rafe Doggett stood a little behind him. The gloved hand was jammed deep in a coat pocket where no one could see it. Della walked to the rail of the disputed pen. She did not hurry. She had rehearsed the rails in the dark, and she found the snubbed calf without one wasted look, third pen, 4 rails down, cropped ear, standing quiet in the middle of the bunch where Toby had driven it. Toby stood at the gate, pale, watching her. She waited for a lull in the count. And when Amos Kell paused to wet his pencil, she spoke. And she pitched her voice to carry the way you pitch it to call 20 men to supper across a windy yard. Mr. Kell, before you mark that pen, I'd ask you to read one calf with me. The whole ring of men turned, A murmur went through them. Here was the cook. Here was the woman Thorpe had named a thief, standing at the rail, bold as brass. Thorpe's easy smile went stiff at the corners. This woman, Thorpe said, loud, to the association, was let go for helping herself to my calves. Her words worth nothing here. Amos, go on with your count. But Amos Kell did not go on. He was looking at Della, at the way she stood, at something in her face. He had been reading brands for cattlemen 30 years, and he had learned to know the difference between a person making noise and a person who knew a thing. You're Tom Marsh's widow, Kell said slowly. I am. I knew Tom. Inspected alongside him 2 seasons out of Miles City. He looked at her a long moment. Tom Marsh's widow asks me to read a calf. I'll read the calf. Which one? The snubbed one, cropped left ear. 4 rails down. She lifted her hand and pointed, and every eye in the ring followed her finger to the little calf standing quiet in the crowd. I'd ask you to bring it to the rail, and I'd ask you to let me put my hand on it and tell you what I see. And then I'd ask you to wet it down and see am I lying. Amos, Thorpe started. Cut it out, Kell said, and it was not clear for a second whether he spoke to the calf or the man. But 2 riders were already moving, and they hazed the snubbed calf out of the bunch and up against the rail, and it stood there bawling and blowing, and the whole association leaned in to see. Della reached through the rails. She laid her palm flat on the calf's flank, over the brand, the way she had in the dark that first night, and the little animal quieted under her hand, just as it had before. Then she read it aloud. This calf wears 2 marks, gentlemen. Her voice did not shake. All the years, all the standing at the right man's elbow, all of it came up steady under her now. You look at it quick. At 10 feet you see a rocking T Silas Thorpe's brand. Clean enough. But come close. She traced it with 1 finger, slow, so the men craning over the rails could follow. See here. Under the top bar of the T there's a scar that don't belong to any T. It comes up from the bottom, and it forks, and it closes. That's a V. And this stroke here, run up and over and dragged into the crossbar, that's the bar off a V-bar. This calf was born wearing Marion Vance's V-bar, and a running iron dragged it into Silas Thorpe's rocking T this spring. The ring of men had gone dead silent. Somewhere a horse blew. Marion Vance had come up to the rail, the old woman in the gray coat, and her boy beside her, both of them staring. And here's how I know it's this spring and not an honest sale, Della went on. Feel it. If you doubt me, no. You needn't take an old cook's word. Amos, wet it down. Kell was already moving. He had a canteen off his saddle and he poured it slow over the calf's flank, and he rubbed the wet hair back the wrong way with the flat of his thumb, and he bent his gray head close to the hide, close as a man reading fine print. The whole association held its breath. The old brand lies flat, Della said quietly to Kell alone now, the way Tom had said it to her. Gone to leather. Healed years back. The new one over it stands up proud and dark. Fresh iron. This spring's iron. A man can heal a brand, but he can't lay the new scar flat, not in 1 season. It stands right up and tells on him. Amos Kell straightened. He looked at the hide. He looked at Della. And then he looked out over the ring of watching cattlemen, and his voice when it came was flat and hard and carried to the last man at the back. She reads it true, he said. This is a V-bar calf, altered, running iron this season. I'd stake my inspector's seal on it. The sound that went through the crowd was low and ugly, 30 men breathing out at once. That's a lie, Thorpe said, but his voice had gone thin. That's 1 calf. 1 mismarked, a hand made a mistake. It happens. 1 calf out of. Then let's read another, Kell said. He did not ask Thorpe's leave. He went down the line of the disputed pen, and he called a second calf. and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and each one he hazed to the rail and wet down and read, and each one carried the same doubled mark, the flat old V-bar lying quiet under the proud fresh rocking T. 5 calves. Then, a sixth. He read them onto his tally sheet, one after another in his flat inspector's voice, and each name he called was another nail, and the ring of cattlemen drew in tighter and colder around Silas Thorpe with every one. 42 head short off Marion Vance's spring tally, Della said into the silence, is 42 head long on Silas Thorpe's. You'll find them all in this pen, gentlemen, wearing 2 brands apiece. I counted them in my book before Mr. Thorpe took my book. I counted them again in the dark with my own eyes. And now the inspectors counted them in the light. That's 3 counts. They all say the same thing. Marion Vance made a sound at the rail, a small broken sound, and her boy Eli put his arm around her, and the boy's face was wet and furious all at once. He had recognized a cow already, out in the V-bar bunch, the snubbed calf's mother, crop-eared like her calf, bawling for it across the pens, the stolen and the robbed, calling to each other across the sorting fence. Now the reckoning came, and it came the way she had known it would, each man breaking in his own way. Rafe Doggett broke first. He had been easing backward through the crowd since the 3rd calf. Quiet. A step at a time, working toward the horses. But Toby Farrell had been watching him, and the boy's voice rang out sudden and cracking over the pen. He held the iron. I seen him. 3 weeks back at a fire past the pens, Rafe Doggett, with a wet running iron and a snubbed calf, and he told me he'd run me off with a thief's name if I said a word. Toby was shaking, but he did not stop. Look at his glove. He wears a glove on that hand summer and winter. Ask him why. Ask him what's under it. Every eye swung to Rafe. And Rafe Doggett, 38 years old and hard as a boot heel, looked at the ring of faces closing on him and lost his nerve. He bolted. He turned and ran for the horses, and he got 3 strides before 2 of the neighbor hands hit him and bore him down into the dust, and they held him there while he thrashed and cursed, and someone dragged the glove off his right hand, and there it was for all of them to see, the old shine of a burn scar across the back of it, the kind a man gets when a running iron slips hot in his grip. He told me to, Rafe said. He set it into the dirt, wild, with a man kneeling on his back. Thorpe told me to do it. Every calf. It was Thorpe's order. I only held the iron, he told me. And that was his sentence, out of his own mouth, and every man there heard it. Then they turned to Thorpe. Silas Thorpe stood alone in the center of the ring. The clean coat, the thumbs that had been so easy in his vest an hour ago. His face had gone the color of tallow. He looked around at the men, his neighbors, the association, 30 faces gone to stone. And he reached. Della watched him do it. He reached into his coat for the one thing he thought could still save him. Her tally book. He pulled it out, her own kitchen tally book that he had taken off her on the porch and pocketed as evidence. And he held it up. Here, he said, and there was something coming apart in his voice now. Here's the proof. Her own book. Her own hand. She's the one counting the calves, gentlemen. She's the one who knew the numbers. A cook doesn't know cattle unless she's in it. Unless she's the inside hand feeding the... Amos Kell reached out and took the book out of his hand. He did not snatch it. He just took it. The way you take a thing from a child. And Thorpe let it go, because there was nothing left in him to hold it with. Kell opened it. He turned the pages, the neat cook's columns, the beef weights, the flour and the coffee and the calf counts. And then he stopped on a page, and he read it aloud, slow, in his flat carrying voice. April. Spring calves short against the cows that dropped them. Counted twice. 42 head cannot be found on the ground. Reported to R. Doggett, who told me to cook and not count. We'll carry this to Mr. Thorpe. Kell looked up. It's dated, Silas, in her hand. Weeks before your roundup. She wrote down the theft and the date and who she told, and she carried it to you, and you kept the book." He closed it. "This isn't a thief's book. This is the warning you buried." There was nothing. Thorpe opened his mouth, and there was nothing in it. Every lie he had, the hide had already answered. The book had already answered. His own foreman had already answered, face down in the dust. He stood in the ring of his neighbors, and he had not one word left that the calf had not already said for him. The buyer's man went next, quiet, the way such men go. He had come for the railroad to take delivery of Thorpe's beef by the head, and he had stood at the back through the whole reading with his little book in his hand. Now he closed the book. He put it in his pocket. He got on his horse without a word to anyone, and he rode off toward the trail, and every man there knew what rode off with him. The contract, the head count, the whole inflated herd that Thorpe had stolen calf by calf to fatten. And the note that fell, due the day after Roundup, $3,000 against a herd that had just been read down to the truth in front of 30 witnesses. Gone. All of it gone. In the time it took an old woman to lay her hand on a calf, the association did the rest that same morning, standing right there at the pen. They voted the disputed calves back to the V-bar, every doubled hide, back to Marion Vance and her boy. They wrote Amos Kell's reading onto the official tally, sealed and witnessed, and they referred the running iron and the man who held it and the man who ordered it to the territory court at Miles City, because rustling was a hanging matter, or near it, and no cattlemen's association would let it pass over their own grass. Marion Vance came to Della then. The old woman took both of Della's hands in her own worn ones, and she could not speak for a moment, and then she said, "You didn't have to. You were fired. You could have walked. Why'd you stay and do this for a stranger's calves?" "They weren't your calves I stayed for," Della said. "They were the truth. My Tom spent 9 years making men tell the truth about a brand. I wasn't going to be the one to let a lie stand on his account." She pressed the old woman's hands. "And they were a widow's calves. I know something about being a widow they'd rather rob." The Vance boy, Eli, stood there with his hat off, and he could not stop looking at her, and finally he just said, "Yes, ma'am," to nothing at all, and it was the finest thing anyone said to her that whole day. The rest fell out the way such things fall. The weeks went by. The territory court took Rafe Doggett, and he told it all to save his own neck. And then the court was done with him, and he went away east, and no one on the creek heard of him again. The bank did what banks do. The note fell due, and Thorpe could not cover it, not with the contract gone, and his count read down to honest numbers, and the rocking T went to foreclosure before the aspens turned. And near the end, before the auction, Silas Thorpe came to Della's fire. She had taken a little place in Halloran by then, cooking at the boarding house on the main street, and one evening he came to her back step with his hat in his hands. She had never seen him hold his hat that way. He looked older. The big man ease was gone out of him like water out of a cracked jug. "Della," he said, "I'll come to it plain. I've got 1 season left before they sell me out from under. If I can show the bank a working outfit, hands fed, books kept, I might hold on. I need a cook. The best cook in the territory." He turned the hat in his hands. "I'll pay double. And I'd ask you too. To keep the past quiet. Let it lie. We're neither of us young. What's the good of dragging it?" Della looked at him a long moment across her own clean step in the last of the screen door light. She was not angry. That surprised her, even then. She had thought she would be, if this day ever came. But there was no anger in her at all. There was only a great tiredness, and under it, something quiet and settled, like a stone that has finally found the bottom of the creek. "Mr. Thorpe," she said, "you want to know my price? Name it." Marion Vance's calves, every head, every dollar the theft cost her, paid back to the V-bar out of your own pocket. And my name cleared in front of the same men who heard you take it. The whole association, standing where they stood when you called me a thief, and you telling them plain that you lied. She folded her hands in her apron. You do that, and I'll cook you one honest supper. After that I don't cook for you again, not for double, not for triple. Some things a woman won't put her hands to. He stood there. The hat went still in his fingers. I haven't got the money for the Vance calves, he said. Low, you know I haven't. It's all going to the bank. I know it. Then you know you're asking a thing I can't do. I know that too, Della said, not unkind. That's the price all the same, Mr. Thorpe. You didn't have coin for my name when it was cheap. You surely haven't got it now. He looked at her another moment. Then he put his hat on his head, and he went down her steps and away up the dark street, and that was the last time Silas Thorpe ever asked Della Marsh for anything. They sold his outfit at auction in the fall. She heard about it after. How the neighbors came and bid on his stock and his gear the way neighbors do, cool and quiet, and how nobody there would take the coffee and the beef that the auction folks laid out for the buyers, not one plate of it, because they knew whose kitchen it had come out of. And no man on that creek would eat what Silas Thorpe's outfit cooked. He stood in his own yard and watched them carry his life off in wagons, and no one ate his food, and that was its own kind of verdict, handed down without a word. A year on, the screen door of the mended V-bar swings and slaps in the summer wind, and the light comes buttery gold across a plain deal table. And there's coffee steaming in a chipped white cup, and the whole kitchen smells of bread just out of the oven. Della cooks for the V-bar now. Marion Vance asked her that first winter, not out of charity, she was careful to say, but because there wasn't a finer cook in the territory and the outfit could stand her at last, with its calves come home and a good year behind it. Della said yes. It felt like the first thing in a long while that fit her hand right. Out in the near pasture, past the pole fence, a young heifer grazes in the honey-colored evening. Crop-eared. She was a snubbed calf once, bawling at a rail with two brands fighting on her hide. Now she wears one mark. Clean and honest, the V-bar. Heeled flat and true, and she grazes easy in the last of the light with her crop-eared mother nearby. The two of them come back together the way they were always meant to be. Toby Farrell is foreman of the V-bar now. 19 and steady, the boy who found his nerve at a rail in the dark. He hangs his hat by Della's door when he comes in off the range, and he says, "Evening, Miss Della," and he eats 2 helpings of everything and thanks her twice. And it's Eli Vance, near 18 now and filling out, who leans in the screen door in the gold light and says, "Supper ready, Miss Della?" Ma's washing up. "Coming, son," she says. "Sit down before it's cold." She wipes her hands on her apron, and she carries the bread to the table, and she sits down among them, the mended family and the honest herd, in a clean kitchen in a small town where her name means what it always should have meant. Her Tom used to say the truth about a brand was simple, in the end. You could run an iron over another man's mark all you liked. You could drag the lines and close the loops, and heal it dark and hope. But the scar stood up. It always stood up, proud and plain, and it told on the hand that held the iron, sooner or later, in the right light, to the right eyes. She never doubted it. Not once, through 15 winters of cooking for men who never looked twice at her, through the fire and the false word, and the long walk down to a pen in the dark. What's burned onto stolen ground has a way of testifying against the ones who burned it. You just have to trust the hide. And be standing there, steady, in the light, when the count comes. Wherever you're watching from tonight, comment your town below. I'd like to know how far this story has traveled.